Creepy and Geeky. Welcome to Creepy and Geeky. I'm your host, Robert, and today is the final part of my Nightmare on Elm Street series. Joining me today to talk about Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, and Wes Craven's New Nightmare is Hugh McStay. Hugh is a horror writer and a critic for the London Horror Society, and he's the co-host of two great podcasts that I've had the honor of being on as a guest, Vampire Videos and Podcast 616. Welcome back to the show, Hugh.
Thank you so much for having me back, Robert. It seems that you only have me back for franchises at the tail end of their lifespan, which I quite enjoyed. Last time I was on was to speak about Jason X and Jason Goes to Hell. So I think I'm only allowed to cover franchise films where the name of the franchise isn't allowed in the title of the film as well, because those two Friday the 13th movies don't have Friday the 13th, and these two Freddy Krueger films don't have Nightmare on Elm Street in their titles. So yeah, I feel like I've carved out an interesting niche for myself here.
It's going to be interesting because talking about Final Nightmare, we're going to get into some parallels with what is it? Jason Goes to Hell.
Jason Goes to Hell, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels and it's a little weird. So no, it's great to have you on again. It's always good to have a niche. I feel like I have a niche when I come onto Vampire Videos, is that I do some weird random
yeah, I'm very without spoiling it for anyone. The episode you're coming on for next, I am ridiculously excited about. I don't want to tell anyone what it is because we like to keep our titles close to our chest. But this is very much stretching the limits of what a vampire film can be as considered. And that's when Vampire Videos really comes alive, I think, Robert. When we think outside the box.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and then with Podcast 616, you guys have had me on a few times for some of the interesting things. I've become the special guy. So
I think you're coming on this season, I think, aren't you, to do an episode of Secret Invasion with us? So that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely.
You've actually lucked out because from what I understand, episode 3, the one that you're coming on to cover, is the big episode of Secret Invasion. From what I understand. So yeah, I don't know what that means, but I've heard a lot of rumbling that that's the one that people are talking about in advance. That shit goes down. Shit goes down. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, I'm even more excited now. All right. Now looking forward to that. So, all right. So let's get into Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. So this one came out in 1991. It was directed by Rachel Talalay and written by Michael DeLuca, which is an interesting thing because Michael DeLuca now is the co-chairperson and CEO of Warner Brothers.
How did that happen?
I don't know. It's interesting, to have read that and just go, wait a minute, how do you get from one? I don't know. It's weird. Everything about New Line Cinema is kind of weird in a lot of ways.
I mean, you look at a lot of the things that he was involved with as well. It's like, I think he did one of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies as well. He was a producer on that. And he's been he's involved with some great things, and he's been involved with some not so great things, which we may talk about today.
Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting. This one was the final, like it says, it's the final nightmare. Freddy's Dead. It was Robert Shea, the guy who created New Line Cinema. He was New Line Cinema has always been billed as the house that Freddy built. Because the original Nightmare on Elm Street and all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies helped make New Line Cinema succeed. Without Freddy, they probably wouldn't have succeeded at all. But by the time that Freddy's Dead came around, they had Critters, and they had success with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, and so they were looking at you know, branching out and getting away from that,
Mhm.
which was interesting. Just looking back on it and going, okay, well, you know, that's kind of, you know, rude, but you're just going to turn your back on your guy who created, you know, helped create you.
Poor
But
Frederick.
yeah, but it's this is to me, this is not a good movie. It's so bizarre because like the other movies there's definitely a dip in quality after number three. They kind of start just going downhill. Number
Mm.
four is just not as good as number three, and then number five gets worse, and number six is just ugh.
Yeah.
um this movie just takes everything that was interesting and fun about the Nightmare series and just doesn't do any of that.
Mhm.
uh,
Yeah, I mean the first three I think kind of hold together pretty well. The second one is very much
yeah,
its own thing. And I remember at the time not enjoying that when I was younger. I just couldn't understand that film. But watching it now and reading the subtext that's going on in the second movie, there's actually a lot to love there. And so then that kind of leaves you just with one and three as kind of like, almost like a sequel to one another. It's like one story
yeah.
told from beginning to end. And you're right. After the third one, it goes insane. I think I messaged you just after I'd watched the fourth one and just thought I could write a PhD about this movie. I'll be honest with you though, Robert. I love the fourth one. It is unabashedly terrible, but like it's so terrible in every measurable way that I think it might be one of my favorites. I enjoyed every second of that film. And then the fifth one's just really dull, and
Yeah.
like I think Freddy kills like three people, and at that point you're really just watching it for the sort of creative Freddy kills, and you weren't even getting that at that point. So yeah, that was very dull. And then yeah, that brings you to Freddy's Dead, which I think I wrote down my notes and I think I stand by this. I think it's just the oddest film in the series.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
like I don't really get it. It's a cartoon. It's a live action cartoon with Freddy Krueger, but I mean, I suppose you could say at least it's aware of what it is.
Yeah.
And it completely plays into the silliness, and really ramps up those sort of cartoon elements. I mean, crikey, Freddy at this point has become a sort of razor-fingered wily coyote at times, and like I said, the fact that the film understands this is kind of what saves it for me because I think Rachel Talalay is a really talented director. Actually, I mean, I'm speaking as a huge Doctor Who nerd, which she's kind of gone on to make her own a little bit. Done a lot of the big Doctor Who episodes. So I know her as a talented director, and clearly she's working with we just say questionable material. Is that the best way of putting it? That's a questionable
Yeah.
script. Yeah. But like it's got an internal consistency, and the consistency is it's insane. It is absolutely bonkers. None of it really makes any sense, but because none of it makes sense, it does hang together. The shenanigans that you kind of get swept up in it, I think, quite well. But like the cast are largely a bit dull and pedestrian. Robert England looks like he's having fun. I can maybe give you that, but like
Yeah.
he's not Freddy anymore. I don't know who he is at this point. I don't know what that character is. And like even the makeup effects that they use for Freddy in this movie, I think are absolutely atrocious. It's so sort of boring and smooth and it just doesn't look like Freddy anymore. I don't think it just looks so terrible. And yeah, it's I think a lot of the problems fall on some of the casting here. I think, if I'm honest with you, I love Yaphet Kotto. I think he is terrific. He's such a B movie icon, isn't he? He's in loads of great sci-fi and horror movies, and he just looks bored in this film. He just looks utterly bored. And don't get me wrong, some of the dialogue that he's got is absolutely terrible, but he doesn't try and inject any character into it. He just says them as though he's reading them off of a script. I love it. There's a point in the film where he just casually mentions that he can control his dreams. And nobody ever questions that. They just go, "Oh, okay, that's fine." And
Yeah.
no one's
Yeah.
saying, "What? Why can you? Why can you do that?" Yeah. Sorry, honestly, I could rant and rave about the madness of this film, but I'll stop for a moment and let you back in.
No, I agree. I think that's the biggest sin a movie can have is just being boring.
Mm,
And that's largely what this is it's boring and shouldn't be. It
yeah.
it really should be a lot better given that you're getting more of Freddy's backstory, but the
Mhm.
the problem is that you don't care. Like ultimately, I don't care about Freddy's backstory. But
No, no.
this has been like a long running thing through the last several installments of this too. Is we're getting more and more of Freddy's backstory, and it's but nobody. I mean, was were people really clamoring for that back then? I don't remember.
Well,
Um, but
just have you seen the Freddy's Nightmares episode that kind of covers Freddy's backstory?
no, I haven't seen it. I need to see it, but
It's
I haven't seen that one.
it's it's a lot of fun, but because it's done sort of like quite quickly in an hour, and they give you it's a very quick rundown of his story, and it's like that's almost all I ever needed from it. And my worry is that there's some Hollywood producer out there somewhere thinking, so we need. We need a gritty reboot of the Nightmare on Elm Street films, but we'll do 2 seasons worth where it's just like the build up to Freddy, where we'll find out what makes Freddy tick. That's what it feels like. The kind of the age that we're living in, where everyone's looking for content. I am dreading that kind of reimagining of the Nightmare on Elm Street films, but you
Right.
feel that it might be coming. But yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. But also when they're telling us Freddy's backstory, it's so dull and boring. I mean,
Yeah.
Alice Cooper shows up as his dad, and it's like, okay, that I suppose that's cool. Yeah, do we like that?
Right.
And then there's the really sort of dreadful, heavy-handed retconning of who Freddy is. Where not just the weird sort of dream demons thing that they shove into this film for no reason whatsoever, which, as you said, bears depressing similarities to what they do to Jason and Jason
Yes.
Goes to Hell. But on top of that, they even try to reframe his motives for being a child murderer. Like, I don't care. Like,
Yeah.
I don't need to feel sorry for Freddy. Or it's like, oh, they took his daughter away from him and he snapped. Well, no, he was, it looked like he was murdering his
He was
wife 10 minutes
killing
before
people. Yeah,
that.
he was killing. Well, the wife was freaking out because he was killing kids before that. So,
Yeah.
like, it's like, I don't know. Yeah, I agree with you. You don't need to reframe his backstory. Well, and this is what's interesting about this is that Rachel Talalay, before she became the director on this, she'd been a producer on several of the previous installments. So
Hmm,
she
hmm.
comes into this one going, okay, well, here's what I want to do finally. I want to
Yeah,
make
yeah.
this my own. And it's like, but this is what you chose. Like, I don't get me wrong, I think she's a good director, but I was just like, this is not the interesting story you think it is.
Hmm, hmm.
Now this movie actually did well, and was one of the more like high grossing ones. Critically it didn't do well, but
Hmm.
it did well financially. So it's you know audiences are kind of dumb, I guess. um or
But I
maybe
mean,
maybe it was just because it was Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare, everybody went to go
yeah,
see how he died, and
that's it. I
so
mean, people were turning out for Freddy at this point. I think we'll go
yeah.
on to talk about this in the next film, but he'd really moved from being a horror star to being a sort of pop culture icon as much
Pop
as
culture
anything else.
icon, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what they were selling the movie on, because they certainly
Yeah.
weren't selling it on quality or or coherence.
Yeah.
Um, and although it's a recurring thing, I think in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, I think this film is particularly egregious for just not adhering to the rules of Freddy Krueger. So it's like, it's a great idea, isn't it? I mean, let boil it down to Wes Craven's original idea: a boogeyman who can kill you in your dreams. Genuinely scary, unnerving, brilliant idea, right? By the time we get to this film, like, it would appear that Freddy can just do whatever he wants, whenever he wants in Springwood. Like, there's no logic to it. Like, when the kids are trying to escape in the van, they're trying to drive out, and they just keep driving in circles.
Yeah.
Like, are we meant to believe that they were asleep at that point? And if they're not,
Right.
why can they not get out? Or when they go into the house, they find a house to hole up in for the night, and then once they close the door, like, the facade of the house explodes off, and you see that it's actually Freddy's house they've gone into. Now, if that was in a dream, I'd be like, oh, that's quite a neat
Yeah.
and fun scene. But that's meant to be like happening in the real world.
Yeah.
Like, what happened in between part 5 and part 6? Now, I know that according to the dreadful prologue,
Yeah.
or the sort of like pre-credits moment where it comes up and tells you we're in the far future of 1999, the
Yeah.
distant future,
10
and
years from
Freddy has
now.
killed
Yeah.
every yeah. Freddy has killed every child in Springwood. Like, you cannot argue with that kind of work ethic, Robert. I mean, I
Yeah.
respect that. You know, that guy, you know, he's got a work ethic, he sticks to it, he gets things done. But I don't get how any of the film works when the John Doe character at the very start of the film is kind of driven, like he's hit by the bus that Freddy's driving, which
Yeah.
knocks him just over the border of Springwood. Was he asleep when that happened?
Yeah.
I don't get any of it. It's all mental.
No, it's definitely there's this like there's no distinction between the waking world and the sleeping world in this movie. You know, at least with the other ones, there was sometimes you would question it.
Yeah.
But you could play it off. Okay, well maybe you were taking a micro nap and fell asleep, you know, which is possible, you know, and so, you know, it's something that is in this movie is not explained at all, is not alluded to at all, and you just okay, so which is the reality? Is just everything in? Are they all just in the nightmare world? Is this all just one big nightmare that's going on all the time that we're not aware of?
Yeah,
and they just think they're in the waking world, you know, and that is never explained, you know, so it's definitely the internal logic of this movie makes no sense at all.
Yeah, and I'm much more forgiving of that generally because, again, I'm not going to see a Nightmare on Elm Street film for the plot. Let's be honest, right? I'm going to see what crazy things Freddy's going to do to a bunch of stupid teenagers that I don't like. But like, it's so egregious here that like it takes you out of the film entirely. You know, you do spend a lot of it thinking, wait a minute, wait a minute. What are the rules here again? Remind me of the rules, because this doesn't seem to be stacking up for me. Can I also just very quickly mention, I have to get this off my chest, Sean Greenblatt as the John Doe character is absolutely atrocious here. He is, without doubt, the worst of all of Freddy's victims throughout the entire movie. I was actively rooting for Freddy to kill him throughout the entire film. He starts at a 10 and he just never moves from there. That's his entire emotional level is at a 10. So you get no empathy with him. Yeah,
he's the worst overactor ever. Like, it's constantly overacting.
I'm just constantly hoping for him to die.
Yeah, and then but Lisa Zane on the other hand is underacting the entire time. Like, she's just dull. And to be the sister of Billy Zane, I'm just like, dude, where's the disconnect there?
Yeah.
So
and also like because of that, you're relying on those two to kind of click on with each other, because that sort of like late act, and I'm using this word advisedly, the late act twist that comes, you know, where the reveal is made that she is Freddy's daughter. Like, come on, guys! Like, that was we all know. Surely we all knew at the time.
Super clear to begin with. Yeah,
it wasn't even ambiguous. The fact that he thought he was Freddy's son made me like. Did I miss maybe an act? Was there an act of the film that I maybe fell asleep during? But no, it makes no sense. Yeah, and I do think like that's kind of a problem for a lot of the film is the casting, because like I said, Lisa Zane, she's a bit of a sort of charisma vacuum in this film. Ricky Dean Logan's Carlos looks like he's about 37 years old. I've got no idea how we're meant to buy him as a teen. Breckin
but on
Meyer,
the other hand, we got Breckin Meyer. So, exactly. Young Breckin Meyer. Now, he's the only one who's fun in this movie. So, you know, but he's doing his Breckin Meyer shtick, which he kind of does in everything, which is fine. I like that. So
it's great that he's found it so early in his career as well, and he's just thought, this works. Right. I'm going to stick with this. Yeah, this is good. So, look, I mean, I feel like we've been incredibly harsh on this film, right? So I don't want to be, I don't want to say it's without any merit, because there are some things that I liked. Okay, Carlos's death in the film is an all-time great death for Freddy Krueger. It's so funny and silly and big and over the top. I absolutely love it. So, you know, when he pulls off, when he cuts off his ear, and then we have Freddy mugging for the camera behind him for about maybe 30 seconds, which is hilarious. And then death by nails on chalkboard is just inspired. It is so fun. And again, like that's why at this point anyway, that's why I'm watching A Nightmare on Elm Street, to see, right, what's he going to do? Is he going to turn someone into a cockroach? Is he going to feed someone their own intestines? Like, what madness has he got, right? Oh yeah, he's going to blow his head up with a chalkboard. Yep, I'm all right. I'm good with that. So, but there are lots of little things that I enjoyed in it. Springwood, what's left of it, I really like. Even though again, it doesn't make any sense. Why are the adults all like that? Like, why is Roseanne Barr and Tom Arnold suddenly in this movie as well?
Yeah.
The whole thing is so weird. But I don't mind it because it's like, again, it's of a piece with the rest of the film. You know, if it was in one of the other movies, it doesn't work at all. But because the rest of the film's insane, it kind of just about works. And I really like the history teacher teaching Freddy history. You know, Freddy kills Elvis, written up on all this sort of stuff. Like, yeah, okay, I can buy into that. But those are little moments, aren't they, that jump out in a film that's just so aggressively bland.
Yeah, and you mentioned the dream demon aspect, and this is something that I thought was interesting. And as I was going along in the series, like with 3, 4, and 5 being this little trilogy of movies themselves, you know, I had thought of that concept as I was watching those movies. I was like, you know, what if the reason that he can't die is that he has ascended past this, you know, this point of no return, like his spirit just can't be killed because he's, you know, he himself is a dream demon, or he has combined his essence with the dream demon, or the dream demon has taken on Freddy's form in some way, shape, or form. And so that was my thought process as I was watching these. And then I get to number 6 and I was like, oh, okay, you know, the maybe where I had the thought was because I had seen it, but I'd only seen it once, and maybe back not too long after it came out, maybe on video or whatever. And so that was kind of in my mind. It may have just been that, you know, maybe they were planting a seed there that, you know, that they picked up in this movie. I don't know, but it's an interesting thought. Now, it's done better in A New Nightmare, and we'll get to that. But but the idea is fairly solid. It's not done well in this movie. And like we said, it very much has parallels to 1993's Jason Goes to Hell.
Jason Goes to Hell.
And so the final Friday. So it's very interesting. And you know, and that was the first New Line edition of Jason as well.
Yeah.
So it's very, very interesting how these two come about. So
yeah, I mean, and obviously I know that around this time they were always dancing around the idea, weren't they, of doing the crossover film that had been mooted so many times at this point and just never came to fruition. So yeah, I mean, maybe that was something that they were a seed that they were sowing that they didn't quite go back to, but yeah, again, there must have been, I can think of any number of ways that would have been more interesting than the way that they chose to have him become the Dream Demon, where he's basically being burned alive. These 3 little like heads appear out of nowhere, swimming around him, and like it's so pedestrian. It's like, we can make you a demon. Excellent, I'll have that. Thanks. There you go. That's it done. And that is it. He's like, oh, I want it all. Oh God, just. You know, there must have been meetings where they sat down and decided this was the way they were going to do it. And like, oh man, I'd love to have been sitting in on those meetings. Just like, who came up with that? Who decided that this was the best way forward? It's so rushed, isn't it? And it lacks any purchase. And again, because it's not really say. I mean, I do take on board what you're saying, that, you know, all the stuff with the Dream Master and you know, and the Dream Warriors, but even then, I mean, those ideas are kind of half baked. You know, there's not really enough there to see the natural progression from one thing to another.
No,
but I also do like that what you're saying there about, you know, 3, 4, and 5 kind of being like an unofficial little trilogy. Apparently, in the first draft of the script, the John Doe character was meant to be sort of like the grown-up version of the baby from Part 5, little
Jacob,
Jacob, thank you. So I mean, again, had that been the reveal, that might have been more interesting as well. But like John Doe dies, and we never find out who he is. Also, so many questions. Also, how is he the last teenager in Springwood? How did that work? How did nobody?
How did he survive all that time? Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, maybe it's best not to look too closely.
The Final Friday. These two movies do like if you can make a little unofficial double feature with these two movies with Final
Mm,
Nightmare and Final Friday, and get that same sense of just that same feeling that like both of these movies are just kind of weirdly off the rails, um and they're very good companions with each other. um
mm.
it's because like that was literally how I felt the entire time watching Final Nightmare. Was like it just felt like Final Friday.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it was just weird, just how much alike they felt. They story wise, they were very, I wouldn't say very different, but they were different enough. But it was just odd and weird how, and maybe it's just the 90s, the early 90s aesthetic that they were doing with that.
Yeah,
But
and also it's they've both got this sort of almost like they're slightly embarrassed that they're Nightmare on Elm Street films and Friday the 13th films, and that there's a need to do something a bit different with them. When in fact, it's like no, people love those movies. They turn up for them because they enjoy the
yeah,
insanity of the characters. There's no real need to, as you said, put a sort of gritty 90s spin on it or an interesting new quirk, because more often than not, it doesn't quite land. And you're right. I mean, it was fascinating watching this film because it's the first time I'd seen it in about maybe, got to go back about maybe 20 years, I think, Robert, since I'd last
yeah,
watched this movie.
yeah.
And it was like, it just caught me off guard at how aggressively dull it was. And, um, and,
Yeah.
and, and the parallels between this and Jason Goes to Hell were just unbelievable. Like genuinely couldn't believe how similar, like, inventing lore and then pretending that lore has been there all along.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think I think when you and I talked about Jason Goes to Hell, yeah, and they visit the famous Voorhees house. Like, what?
yeah.
The Vor the have I missed two or three movies again? What's happened here? And it's a bit like that here, where they just assume that like they just make up things that don't actually land. And like I said, the biggest one for me is the idea of Freddy now suddenly having dominion over all of Springwood. Just why is that? Because the plot needs him to, pretty much.
Yeah.
So he can do it now. It's fine.
Yeah, yeah. Waking or not, he has
Yeah.
complete dominion over Springwood. It is now that he has killed every child except for one, that and he only sent that one away to gather more children to bring to him. And it's like, which in
Mhm.
itself is not a bad idea. It's an idea that's better explored in Freddy versus Jason.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, absolutely.
so
Yeah.
and I will continue to preach this. I've said in a few times already in the series, is that Freddy versus Jason is a great movie that distills both of the lore of both of those
Hmm.
characters and makes it make sense, and is just a fun story a fun movie on top of all that. So for
I think
everybody who shits on Freddy versus Jason, shut up. It's a good movie.
Well, Freddy versus Jason for me is a film that gets better with age. Like the further
Yeah.
away I get from it, the less beholden I am to it being a bit broad and silly, and a bit. I don't get as upset about that. I mean, at the time, I remember it's maybe a bit too much, but the further away I get from it, and the more time I have with it, it's like no, actually, it's very much a movie of its time, of when it was made.
Yeah.
But I think you're absolutely spot on. It treats both characters with a bit of respect, actually, and a bit of reverence,
Yeah.
and like it pays homage to the lore of both, and like unlike this movie, it remembers the rules. It knows what
Yeah.
Freddy's rules are, and because of that, the plot is made in such a way that it's designed to work within the rules. Whereas, as I said, this film just feels like, well, we need Freddy to do this. Have we got an excuse for it? No, no, no. Just go with it anyway. It's fine, and that's really disappointing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's definitely, this movie could have been good. But it like fails on almost every level
Yeah.
of meeting that expectation. And for something that's supposed to be, you would think that you would want to go out on this high note. And
Mm.
I'm assuming that's what they tried to do. That's what's frustrating, is like, because these filmmakers, they go into these movies with the best of intentions, the best thinking that these movies are going to be good. You don't think, like, I don't suspect anybody goes in making a movie knowing it's going to be terrible.
Yeah, yeah.
They think that this movie is going to be great, and it's just, I don't know, it just, when it comes out and you see it and you're like, what made you think this was good?
Yeah.
Like, what part of this made you think this was good? And so
It's
it's
also
just frustrating.
yeah,
Go
it's
ahead.
also fascinating to think that, I mean, this was it. This was the last Nightmare on Elm Street film that we
Yeah,
got, which I remember at the time there being a lot of skepticism and a lot of like, of course this isn't the last one. Don't be ridiculous. We're
yeah,
gonna have, they're gonna keep. We're on part 27 by this point. But yeah, apart from the shoddy remake, I can't believe that there hasn't been a new Nightmare on Elm Street movie in almost
yeah,
what's it, like 30 years, 30 odd years. Yeah, I don't like that. I'm not happy. Well, I know
it's
that.
interesting.
Yeah, but I know that Bloomhouse have kind of have danced around it a few times, or Jason Blum certainly talked about it. That's something that he would
Yeah.
like to do, and yeah, it just feels that that's the right place for Freddy to come back, and obviously, I suspect Robert Englund may be a little bit too long in the tooth now to reprise the
Oh,
role,
they'll
but
definitely have to get somebody else for sure.
yeah.
But and hopefully they'll get somebody good. I'm perfectly fine with them creating another remake. And as I mentioned in my first episode where I talk about the remake, that they just need to stick with the formula. The
Mhm.
main problem with the remake that I had, and that I'll repeat, is that I just think by making him a actual child molester rather than a child killer
Mhm.
really made everybody grossed out and just go, nope, that's not what we were here for.
Yeah,
We were
yeah,
here for, him killing people because he was just a killer,
yeah.
and turning it into something different just made it just gross and dark in a bad way. Like, you can make Freddy dark, but don't do it in that way. It just left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. And
Yeah.
I think that it could, because I mean, other than that, it's actually an okay movie. The actors in that one are really good, and everything other than that is fairly okay. Even Jackie Earl Haley does a pretty good job of being Freddy.
We
So
see. I mean, it's been a while since I've revisited the remake because I went to the cinema to see it, Robert, and honestly, I hated it. I absolutely hated it because it's got shades of that thing that I mentioned at the start of the episode. It's got shades of like this desperate attempt to do a gritty, realist
yeah,
version of Freddy, and it's I don't want that. That's
yeah,
if you think that that's what Freddy Krueger is, like you've misunderstood the character.
yeah,
Like some of he can be scary. I think that's absolutely fine. He should be scary, but
yeah.
it's the surrealism of it that should that
Yes.
you could get your laughs out of as well. I don't, as I said, I don't need to know his sordid backstory. I don't need to know that he had a tough upbringing and an abusive father.
Yeah.
I get he's probably come from a bad family if he's grown up to be a razor figured maniac. I
Yeah.
appreciate things aren't great. I don't need to know it because I'm here to enjoy myself at a horror movie.
Yeah.
If I want something else, if I want something with a bit more realism, I'll stick on like a mind hunter or a true detective. I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not why I'm coming to Freddy Krueger. I'm afraid.
No, and I think that's what makes Freddy, like, I think that Freddy has to have a combination of this, like, a good Freddy movie is going to have him being scary. He's got to be
Mm,
scary. I think that he has to be funny, but I don't think he has to be silly funny like we get in Freddy's Dead. I think he needs to be, like, it's got to be some dark comedy, like,
yeah.
some really terrible, like, just really dark humor in there.
Mhm.
And that's the only way you can do it is have that aspect of it where he's still funny, but it's not a cartoon.
We see.
When you tip over to that cartoon,
Mm,
it takes away from that too much.
I think part three gets the mix
I think,
probably the
yeah,
best. Yeah, it's like he is funny at points in that film, but he never really loses his sense of menace and horror.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and don't get me wrong, as I mentioned earlier, I love part four to bits. I do. I absolutely love it. But again, it's proper through the looking glass madness now at this point. It's like, yeah, he's a wisecracking live action cartoon. It's not scary
Right.
anymore, but
No.
it's fine, and it kind of works for me on the level that it's going for. Whereas with Freddy's Dead, it's like it seems to have forgotten both of those things. It doesn't know
Right.
how to be funny, and he's certainly at no point scary or intimidating. It loses everything that I like about the character.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think another aspect that I want to see in any future Nightmare on Elm Street movie is I would like to see like dream logic, like dream, like when they're in the dream world and when they
Mm-hmm.
realize they're in the dreams, things go crazy because
Mm-hmm.
it's one thing to create a reality, and that's fine because that's what you want them to question whether they're in the real world or not in the beginning. But once they realize they're in the dream, everything should go crazy, like and in such a way that it's obviously visual effects, because that would
Uh-huh.
be how a dream would be, like especially with Freddy being able to control that aspect of it. You would want him to be shifting things and moving things in ways that aren't physically possible. And I mean, we've seen hints of it here and there, but largely he's just chasing them around the damn boiler room. So it's like, get out of the boiler room. It's not
Yeah.
that scary. I mean, it's scary, don't get me wrong, but it's not
Well,
scary on the level of, hey, let's twist reality around you and make it so that you don't know where you're going at all. And so
yeah, yeah.
we've
There are
seen it in
definitely,
parts, don't get me wrong. We
yeah. I
have
was gonna
seen
say
it here and there, but
there are definitely elements of that in the first Nightmare on Elm Street.
yeah,
Wes Craven's got a real eye for that sort of thing, and obviously it's still fairly grounded because very early in that sort of working
yeah,
within that reality. But even in New Nightmare, which we're going to get to, there are moments in that I think where they blur those lines remarkably well,
yeah,
to the extent at which even I was kind of caught off guard because I wasn't, it'd been that long since, and it's another film I hadn't seen in a long, long time.
yeah,
When they choose to do that sort of thing, I think it works really well.
yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, speaking of, let's go ahead and jump into Wes
Hmm.
Craven's new Nightmare. This one came out in 1994, which was 3 years after the final Nightmare. So obviously they weren't done. But I think that they made a smart decision in this. This storyline was actually created. Wes Craven actually created the storyline back when he was writing Dream Warriors. Dream Warriors was actually the second idea he had. He first came up with the idea for New Nightmare. And Robert Shea was like, "Nah, let's not do that one." And they were like, that we're not ready for that." And
Yeah.
so he ended up having to transition and do Dream Warriors instead, which is fine. Dream Warriors is a great movie. But New Nightmare is on a whole nother level. New Nightmare is possibly
Mm.
um my favorite next to the original. Because it's just it's bonkers, it's scary,
Mm.
it's got this whole metatextualness that he does even better in the Scream movies.
Hmm.
But this is his like trial run for it, and he does it so well in this, even
Yeah.
inserting himself as a part of it. And Heather Langenkamp is back as the Nancy, well, not as Nancy, she's back as herself. um and it's interesting. And what's really interesting is, and we'll get into this a little bit more in a bit, is that they pulled in actual aspects of Heather Langenkamp's life at
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
time that, when this information about it, actually makes this movie scarier in a lot of
Hmm.
ways. And I'm actually surprised she went along with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's an interesting take on everything.
Hmm.
um
I mean,
Go ahead.
I'm a bit like you, Robert, with this film. I think this is terrific. I haven't seen it in about 10, 15 years, but I remember really liking it. I've got a very fond memory of watching it, and so if I'm brutally honest, I kind of put off revisiting it for a while because I was a bit concerned, like, oh, please just let me enjoy my memories of a good Freddy movie and let me not go back and be faced with the fact that actually it's a bit naff. But I put this on the other night and it completely blew me away by how good a horror movie and a Freddy movie it is. You're absolutely right. You can definitely see the seeds being planted here that would kind of blossom into Scream. I mean, Wes Craven's always been a really interesting filmmaker, but this is clearly where he get interested in sort of deconstructing what a horror film is.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating that he starts by deconstructing his own creation, what his own horror film was. So I think that's a really interesting place for him to leap off of. I would say that the meta stuff is maybe a wee bit too surface level to really land, but I don't think that's a problem because the horror story underneath it is still incredibly strong. And it's how great is it to see Freddy reimagined as a genuinely scary character again. I think this may actually be my favorite look for Freddy out with the original film.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because the original film for me, it's an iconic look, but I always think as well, he looks disgusting. Like he looks like, he looks like he smells. And
Yeah.
do you know what I mean by that? And it's, as each film went on, he get progressively more sanitized until we got to Freddy's Dead, where like I said, it just looks like he's wearing a rubber mask. It doesn't even look like Freddy anymore. Whereas here, like he's like this terrifying demon. I like the redesigned glove where it's a sort of like almost like
glove,
a bone.
yeah.
It's like a bone claw or something, which is really cool. And the long coat as well. I think that really works for the character. And you can really feel again that Robert Englund's having a lot of fun doing something other than just gunning for the camera and making dreadful puns. And I mentioned earlier, but it bears repeating the way that this film blurs the lines between the real world and the dream world is perfect because it does so within the rules of what you understand a Freddy movie to be, and like you see someone almost drifting off and then they kind of catch themselves. But as an audience member, because you've been conditioned, right? We're almost certainly in the dream world now. But you know what I mean? It's much more cautious about playing by its own rules. And like the tonal shift between the last film and this one, like practically gave me whiplash. It was that bad. It's the antithesis of everything that last movie was. But yeah, I think it's terrific, and again, it revisits the idea that you mentioned of like this entity, feeding on the power of what Freddy is, and that's such a good idea. It really is. Yeah. It's so clever. This thing reaching out of the celluloid to try and get the people, who are bringing it to life to try and insist on bringing it back to life. And yeah, absolutely terrific. Heather Langenkamp as well is. Oh, she's terrific. One of my favorite final girls.
So good in this. Yeah.
Yeah, and here it's great that they went back to her, and I love every time she's on screen with like one of the old gang, when her and Robert Englund are interacting, or when it's her and Wes Craven. That's my only criticism, if I'm honest, Robert. I wanted more of that, give me more. I wanted to see Robert Englund being like tortured or harassed by Freddy. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, it's interesting though too, because like you don't get that. Like all of a sudden, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but there's this, she talks to him and she meets him momentarily. They do a talk show, and Freddy, Robert Englund comes out as Freddy and everything, and later on they talk on the phone, but then she tries to like call him or get a hold of him later, and he's just gone, and we're presuming though that he's been killed by Freddy at this point. Just because of the way the movie is, but we never get any kind of clarification of that or anything, and it's so odd. So there's definitely this weird, even as the audience, like even the reality seems like not real a lot of times, and so there's this weird layer of that going over everything, which lends itself more to this movie, like this unreality, especially because, like I mentioned, there's a lot of Heather Langenkamp's life that was brought into this movie. Because at the time she was really married to a special effects guy. She's still married to him. She's been part of his company ever since. That's why she hasn't done as much acting over the years, is because she's just been involved on that side of things. She had a son at the time, and she was also getting harassing phone calls from somebody. And so all of this gets brought into this, and like it's so bizarre to have this like layer of reality going on with this movie that's, we understand that it's a fake story, but
Mhm.
it's like, but pulling so much of her life at the time into it had to be weird for her as an actress. Like, sure, I mean, it's fairly easy to, you know, get that, find that emotion and find that
Yeah.
that when it's part of what was your real life. So I mean, it's that part of it's interesting, but it's just weird, that they were able to pull all that in, and that she was just like, yeah, sure, we'll do that. And I'm like, more
Yeah, I mean,
kudos to her for doing so.
yeah, I think a lot of the film, it kind of stands and falls on the strength of the performers, and she
Yeah.
is so good, and she's such a giving performer here. And she goes through the full gamut. I mean, she's by the end of the film, she's practically back as Nancy, isn't she? She goes kind of
Yeah.
right back into that role, which even gets the schlock of grey hair, which I really liked.
Yeah.
But even the cast around her, I mean, Tracy Middendorf as Julie, the nanny, is really really good, and because she's a performer who's she always anytime I see her in anything, she's always got this sort of innate vulnerability about her, and I think that lends itself to the character of Julie really well. And the same with Miko Hughes is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
That little boy is terrific. I mean, obviously, he's already a bit of a horror icon, having played
Yeah.
little Gage in Pet Cemetery. I mean, let me just say, after this film, that kid just lives to mess with traffic, doesn't he? He's got no fear when it comes to trucks. But yeah, I think that kind of enhances this movie for me, because, and also, and I don't mean this as a disrespect to the other directors who've worked on the franchise, having a director like Wes Craven in charge of things, just it immediately changes how everything runs. Again,
Yeah.
the film makes sense. You've got a filmmaker who is going to insist that the film hangs together narratively. And I know that's a very basic ask, but some people don't seem to be able to grasp that. But Craven drags that back in line, and then obviously he's fascinated by this idea of what Freddy has become, and this is something I'm endlessly
Hmm.
fascinated as a child of the 80s and 90s. I was watching these movies when they were being released, right? My mum and dad would rent them from the video shop for me. And I was watching these when I was maybe 10 years old. And I was obsessed with Freddy. Obsessed. I had posters on my wall of A Nightmare on Elm Street. My mum and dad got me like a replica Freddy glove for Christmas. I was obsessed. And it's only now as an adult and I look back that it is mind boggling to me that character broke out of like the horror realm and became, as we mentioned earlier, a pop culture icon. It's insane. I mean, he went from this as we say, a razor fingered child murderer to like starring in rap videos and breakfast
Yeah.
cereals and his own TV show and talk show appearances. And like that moment where where Robert Englund shows up dressed as Freddy to at the chat show in the film, and he looks to the audience and he's kind of waving to everybody, and it's like it's just full of kids. And I don't know if you would get that now. I mean, again, I let my children watch certain horror films. I'm very cautious. I would never have let them watch like the Nightmare on Elm Street movies as young as I was.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating, and I think that's something that not Robert Englund, sorry, that's something that Wes Craven is really interested in. I've read lots of interviews where he's just fascinated about the life that Freddy took on after he left. And I did read an interview with him just after this film was released, where he was talking about like he hadn't really seen the other movies, he kind of avoided them, and he sat there and watched every one of them before he started production on this one. And he said, yeah, but by the end, I just couldn't tell what was happening. Even I had lost track of everything. And yeah, so I mean, I would, how great would that have been to sit with Wes Craven and watch to see what they'd done to his creation over the six films. But yeah, it's got so many interesting sort of things pivoting around in this movie. And like I said, I do think sometimes the meta stuff is a bit surface level, but it's not a problem for me when you've got such a great horror story just under the surface.
Yeah, no, definitely. I like going into his version of Freddy becoming this a dream demon that's been existing since time immemorial.
Mm.
That it's this creature that like it keeps rearing its head and can only be contained, and in this instance it was only contained by becoming Freddy,
Hmm.
by him creating Freddy in the first movie. He somehow trapped this dream demon in the form of Freddy and within the in the movie world. And by
Hmm.
the fact that they killed him off in the last one, that let him loose again. And that's like what was going on. That's what was terrorizing Nancy and everything, because he really, like, this dream demon really wanted to be Freddy. And
Hmm.
that's, he really liked that form. It was like, okay, well, I like this form, but now I'm out, and I won't, I'll just be Freddy on the outside now. And it's an interesting concept.
Hmm.
It goes back to a lot of what he went back to his original concepts, and kind of twisted in a little bit of what they did in the last movie, but did it in a better way.
Yeah,
And
and also
it's just
around
fascinating.
this time as well, we had Last Action Hero, I think the year before this, which plays with very similar ideas as this film. And yet, I remember at the time, Last Action Hero was a bit of a flop, wasn't it? And it was kind of
Yes.
widely ridiculed. An insane decision because that is a terrific film. But this film, only a year later, playing with similar ideas, it was critically quite well regarded. I don't know if that is just because maybe an Arnie movie trying to be as clever as that is not what people were looking for or invested in. Whereas a Wes Craven movie, people were more willing to buy into the idea of him sort of deconstructing what his oeuvre had become. I don't know. I mean, what do you think of that? I'm endlessly fascinated by the way that similar films are kind of, they're just completely they're received in such different terms when they have such similar output.
I think that it's because one was like an action comedy and one was a horror movie, and they were both done in different tones and different ways. Like with Last Action Hero, that one's a spoof in a lot of ways of Arnold Schwarzenegger himself,
Mm,
taking all of his bigger than life action heroes and creating this goofy, fun, like almost family movie in a way. That you've got this kid tagging along, and just them having fun with it, and it's
mhm,
it's somehow different than what we get in both New Nightmare and eventually in the Scream franchise,
mm.
with this metafictional, metatextual way that it's they're both doing the same thing. They're both commenting on you know I think with New Nightmare, though, New Nightmare isn't even really commenting on horror movies themselves. It's really narrow in that it's only talking about the Nightmare movies and
Yeah,
what
yeah.
they mean to Wes Craven, what they mean to her, the concept of Freddy as a whole, because it really does. He like you said, it speaks to Freddy's pop culture icon status at that point, with him coming onto that talk show and all the kids out there with their Freddy, like, because that's what it was like.
Yeah,
People,
yeah.
I don't think people really understand, because we don't have a, like, anybody who didn't grow up with that, like, we don't have anything that's even similar. Like, Ghostface isn't on that part, is not on that level. Nobody was on that level like Freddy
No.
was. Like, not even Michael Myers, not Jason. Nobody was on that
Hmm.
level like Freddy was. Freddy was on a completely different level. And I think that's because largely he had become that cartoon, that caricature of
Mm, yeah.
himself, especially through 4, 5, and 6. And so
Hmm.
by that time in the 90s, it was just like he had become a joke, in a lot of ways. Not
Yeah, yeah.
necessarily a bad thing, a bad joke, but just like, he was in on it too. Robert England was participating in all of it.
Hmm.
He was the one in the makeup going on to all the shows and doing everything, because he was having a good time with it. He was probably making some good money on it too.
Yeah, absolutely.
um
Yeah.
and he obviously enjoys playing Freddy, in every permutation. He likes being funny Freddy, he likes being scary Freddy. So it's just this different concept, I think, than with I don't know why people couldn't take or couldn't enjoy The Last Action Hero. But I think just because of its goofier nature that they just, which is funny though, because I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger himself was never not one to be funny. I mean, his
Yeah.
characters were always over the top. And to spoof that, in like to have, I think it's just because it's more spoofy and people were just like, they didn't know how to take that. They wanted a straight up Arnold action movie. And they were just like, oh, yeah, but that's not what this is. And so I think that's the big disconnect. Whereas with Freddy, because Final Nightmare did so terrible that, at least critically, that when New Nightmare comes around, people are like, okay, let's see what's going to happen. We get Wes Craven back, we got Heather Langenkamp back. This is going to be scary. This is going to be a whole new level of everything. And Wes Craven hits it out of the park. Now, here's the thing: I love Wes Craven. He's a great director, but he's a great director on a few things. His hit to miss ratio is pretty high. So, he's got more misses than hits, I think. But when he hits big. Like it's different. Like, so John Carpenter, I feel, has a bigger hit ratio. John Carpenter's movies, like across the board, especially from Halloween to They Live, is strong. It's super strong. Like he we got Christine, Big Trouble in Little China, The Thing. There's so many movies that are just like iconic classics in there. But Wes Craven just doesn't have that. Wes Craven's big things are, and the things he's most well known for, are like Last House on the Left, Nightmare, and Scream. Don't get me wrong. He had massive hits, massive cultural touchstones in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, and changed things each time. Like Last House on the Left was influential, Nightmare was influential, Scream was influential. Every time he hit so big, his misses were just kind of like, okay, yeah, no, we forgive all his misses because he just is so good. Because I mean, that's what's funny though too, because we get Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and then we get Scream 2 years later, but wedged in between there is a terrible movie, which is Vampire in Brooklyn.
Oh yeah,
and
but believe me, I know all about Vampire in Brooklyn.
And you should all go listen to the Vampire Videos episode on it because it's funny.
Well, that episode was fun to record, but also because it was a chance to talk about Wes Craven, and I couldn't agree more with what you just said. I would echo that. I think he's not a director afraid to take a big swing, and I think that's really admirable. He never, no matter how successful he was always willing to try and reinvent himself and do something different. And like you said, Last House on the Left, and then The Hills Have Eyes followed on shortly after that, and then A Nightmare on Elm Street. It's hard to try. It's hard to try and you can't overstate how big a film that was, in the sort of, as we said, in sort of the cultural landscape as well of America at the time. I mean, it was massive, absolutely huge, and went on to spawn so many sequels that obviously he didn't really have much of a part of. And then I think after that, he I wouldn't say lost his way a little bit, but it took him a while to find what he was wanting to do. But even within that period, there's a lot of really interesting films.
Yeah, there's interesting stuff.
Yeah, The Serpent and the Rainbow, I think, is a highly underrated film. People Under the Stairs, I know it gets a lot of love, and I've got a lot of time for that movie as well. And then I think this movie is underrated slightly because Scream comes so quickly after it. I think people look at Scream
does
as
the meta better.
Which I totally get, but I don't think you get Scream unless he has a swing at it first with Freddy.
And
he I think he gets he gets the Freddy bug out of his system with this one. He tells the story he wants to tell. And I've said this a couple of times. I want to really stress it because it's true. It's a really good horror film. Like, take all the meta stuff away for 1 second. The idea of this evil demon, that's co-opted a horror movie for the last 20 years, to keep itself to sustain itself, which is now trying to reach out from beyond the celluloid to get into the real world. That's a really good idea, and it's well realized. And like I said, all the meta stuff is a lot of fun, but it's the horror that I enjoyed almost just as much. But I don't think you get Scream without this movie. And again, he directed the first four Scream movies, and they're all really good. Like even for me, Scream 3 is kind of the weakest of the three. But even then, having revisited it recently, it's like, yeah, it's quite a good slasher movie, actually, quite serviceable. Um, I'm on record as saying that I think the Scream films are kind of like, there's not been a bad Scream movie yet. There've been some that are better than others, some that aren't quite as good as I would like, but I can't say I've seen a single bad one yet. And it's remarkable that Wes has got his fingerprints on the first four.
Yeah. No, and I truly feel like even with the latest two, that they are, because they have Kevin Williamson as a producer on
Mm.
them, that they are keeping the essence of Wes Craven alive in those.
Yeah, yeah.
They very much feel like something that he would have a hand in, even if he wasn't the one directing them. And
Hmm.
so it's interesting. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think we get Scream without New Nightmare. As much as I feel like the Scream franchise is very much this interesting mix of Wes and Kevin Williamson, that they both brought all the interesting things together, and I think that's why they work so well together through most of those movies. And that they kept coming back together for them, and and Cursed, as much as Cursed turned out to be not great. I believe there was a better version of it that just didn't get
Yeah.
made. But New Nightmare is his way of kind of taking those ideas, and I think that's what's interesting about the Scream franchise, is that Kevin Williamson had this idea, but I don't think even that would work without Wes.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
without that combination of both of them together, you don't have what became the Scream franchise in general. um
Yeah.
it's a great combination, and that seed is planted really firmly in New Nightmare, in the terms of, and that's obviously what he wanted to do, was do something that spoke to horror movies, but also his fascinations with dreams, and this night, this dream demon kind of folklore and everything.
Hmm.
So it's very much, it's so interesting. It's this is why, like, I put this on such a high pedestal for me in the franchise, because it does explore a lot of this stuff that he was probably wanting to talk about more in the first one, and then didn't have the chance to. And I think they kind of let him off the chain on New Nightmare. They were just like, okay,
Yeah.
fine, do your thing, have fun with it, whatever. And he did.
Yeah. For me, it's lovely that the last in the sort of the run of Nightmare on Elm Street films is this one. It
Yeah.
ends. Although Freddy's dead is the end of Freddy.
Yeah.
The end of the Nightmare saga is here, and it ends on such a massive high. I kind of count. I don't know, but I count Freddy versus Jason as its own thing. And I don't mean that
Yeah.
as I
Same.
don't mean that as a negative. In fact, I really enjoy that movie. As I said, the
Yeah.
more every time I go back to it, I find, oh, I actually like it a lot more than I remembered liking it. Every single time I go back. But yeah, in terms of like those seven movies, I think it's a wonderful bookend to have Craven at either side, and creating, and I honestly think the original is still the best. It has dated; it's very much an '80s movie, but
Oh
that's
yeah.
fine. If you take it on those terms, it's arguably the best '80s horror movie around. I think it's wonderful. Um, as the host of Vampire Videos, I'm contractually obligated to say that Lost Boys, Fright Night, and Near Dark are also still available. But apart from vampire movies, A Nightmare on Elm Street is the yardstick for me. And then I think you could watch this one. You could watch 1, 3, and 5, and you'll have like not 5, 1, 3, and 7. Sorry, if you watch
Yeah.
those three movies, you kind of have an unofficial little trilogy there that link up quite nicely, and you get three genuinely excellent horror films out of it. And then everything else has its charm. It really does. I mean, I would
Yeah.
argue anybody. Um, the only one I don't really like all that much. I know we've kind of taken Freddy's Dead to task, okay, but the cartoony zany nature of it kind of like,
Yeah.
it made it kind of watchable for me. The only one I found part 5 just dull as well, just a bit sort of plodding, and sort of just it just didn't work for me. But Like there are things in the fourth movie that I think are hysterically funny. The second movie has its own thing going on. Reading that movie like through it like, as a queer story, I think
Yeah.
completely changes everything about it. It still remains to this day my favorite thing in the world that the writers of that film insist that they didn't queer code it, they didn't have any of that stuff.
Right?
It's like how how is that possible? But they are very much like they're not offended that people read that into it. Absolutely. You,
Yeah.
you read what you read into a film, but they're adamant that they didn't put it in there on purpose, which is I think those lads need to have a long chat with a therapist and really, get to the root of their desires. But yeah, like the second one is its own thing as well, and it has a lot of interesting things. But 1, 3, and 7 together are just this lovely little trilogy where you get three great performances from Robert Englund and Heather Langenkamp, who is absolutely
Yes.
terrific in
Yeah.
all of them. And yeah, Wes Craven working at the very top of his game, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I would agree that, if you want to watch any of these, you would be best just watching 1, 3, and 7, and then just being done. It's fine.
Yeah,
You're okay. You're not missing anything.
yeah, because
But if
you
you
can,
do want to watch more, go ahead. It's fun.
yeah, you can
There's
definitely
something to.
recommend those
Yeah.
ones for their kitsch value. I mean, and I
Yeah.
definitely would.
Absolutely.
Having watched them with with my 16-year-old daughter, who'd only ever seen 1 and 3. I watched 1 and 3 with her a couple of years ago over Halloween, and she loved them because they're a great double bill, those two movies together.
Yeah.
And so when I said that I was going to be coming on the podcast to talk about 6 and 7, she's like, "All right, let's watch them all together." And yeah, we basically like honestly, I don't think I've laughed as much in years as I did when the two of us were watching A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4. Genuinely, there's so much in that film that I love to bits, but it's so silly. It is so silly. But yeah, like for kitsch value, they all kind of have their own little things. But yeah, there's a great trilogy in those 7 movies somewhere.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I agree completely. I think that it's just, overall, it's so funny too, because I've mentioned before that, as a kid or even as a, young adult, I would have probably said out of all the 80s slasher things, I probably would have said Freddy was my favorite.
Mm,
But, as time has gone on and everything, I've obviously changed that because, while, 1, 3, and 7 work really well. And I think that if you only watch those, you would probably be okay with that, and Freddy would stand the test of time. But
mm,
because of, for me, 4, 5, and 6, have diminishing value, and they kind of sanitize him in a way that like um just kind of makes him more bland, and you take out that pop culture icon status of him, that he's just not as effective, like
mm,
not as, for me. And so I find it interesting, like upon having gone back through this, and having seen other stuff recently and everything, it's funny. He's still kind of up there, don't get me wrong. I you know but it's just not. I would still put Jason above him at this point. I think Friday the 13th is a more solid and fun series overall. Um,
mm.
but even for the fact that it's not so solid, but it's got its little charms. So it's just interesting. It's fascinating. But again, I will always go back to Freddy versus Jason is the perfect encapsulation of both of those franchises. If you want something that is, Freddy and Jason to the core, and honors them and pushes them forward in a lot of ways, watch that movie because it is really good.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I mean, like
but
there are a few films where you can get your two principal actors to do a UFC style weigh-in Las Vegas before for a movie premiere, which was just hysterical. It's interesting you say that about Friday the 13th because I've had almost the opposite reaction, which is fascinating.
that's so
Um,
funny.
yeah, because I revisited all them as well when I was coming on to do those last two movies. And like, yeah, I just they don't stand up for me the way that the Nightmare movies do. But I think I think the best of the Nightmare on Elm Street films, the three that we mentioned, kind of elevate it above those other
Yeah,
movies because
I
I
could
don't
see
think
that.
there's
Yeah.
you know what I mean? I don't think there's a single Friday the 13th movie that's as good as New Nightmare or as good as the original Nightmare on Elm Street. That's not to say
Uh,
that they're bad. I mean, and I
yeah.
do enjoy a lot about them. I
Yeah.
just think
Yeah.
like for me, it's just about those three films elevate the rest, and I completely agree. Like I said, it's maybe my own sort of maybe it's just my own quirks. I love the silliness of four so much that I can forgive it a lot. And five and six are the two that kind of struggle a little bit for me. But other than
Yeah.
that, I can get something out of all the rest of them.
Well,
Don't judge me. Don't judge me.
no, I'm not judging you at all. To each their own. No. All right. Well, I am done with these. Do you have any other last comments about either one of these movies?
No, not really. Just again, just a song. I loved going back to them, even though Freddy's Dead was hard work at points. There were
Yeah.
things in it that I enjoyed, including, like I said, my favorite Freddy death. I think maybe ever, like that death by nails on chalkboard is hysterical and perfectly in keeping with the tone of that film. And yeah, New
Yeah.
Nightmare, I loved it, and I'm so glad to find that I loved it because, as I said, I was concerned, but no, I had no reason to be concerned. It stands up really well. It's a great
Oh, yeah.
horror movie, and yeah, it's lovely to see the seeds of Scream being planted here.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, why don't you let people know where they can find you online?
Yeah. So the best place to find me is Twitter. I think you can get me there. I'm over at Angry Scotsman 81. My link tree's there with all my links to my writing, my fiction work, and my critical work. And also, you can get me on Vampire Videos and Podcast 616 that we mentioned earlier. Vampire Videos is, can you believe this, Robert? We're about to finish our fourth season. It's bonkers. Dan and I we've already recorded. I think we've recorded 2 episodes of the fifth season as well, and our anniversary special, which is just insane at this point. And yeah, it's going very
You
well.
guys
So yeah,
got to
keep
get
your
me
ears.
back on. I know I'm coming on for a future
Yeah,
episode, but
I,
I
I
am
feel
ready
terrible.
and ready to go for more.
Yeah, I know. I feel terrible. It's not just you. We've got a lot of guests that we're keen to have back on, but because we record so far in advance,
No,
like
I understand.
I think the episode you're coming on for an episode, I think in July, but I don't think that episode airs until like September, October.
I'm
It's
pretty
absolutely
sure I don't
crazy.
even no, I don't even think I record until August.
It's August. Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah, I was like that's what I was like I was laughing too cuz when I'm assuming it was Dan who was getting a hold of me, but yeah, I was just like yeah, August 28th. So it's not even just August. It's
Oh
late
man.
August. It's almost
Yeah.
September.
Well, we were talking about it. Like by the time we finish our recording in August, that will be us covered for episodes until I think it's like November, which is just it's crazy. Don't get me wrong; it takes the stress off the edit. You know, when we're that
Oh
far
yeah, for
ahead, it
sure.
means that we can kind of fit it in around all of our other commitments. But yeah,
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
problematic to get people back on.
Yeah.
But yeah, listen, we'll have you on, and we're also going to have you on for, as we mentioned earlier, we're going to have you on podcast 616.
Yeah.
Myself and the wonderful Ashley Thomas, the nerdy blogger. We host that. So we're currently doing our weekly Secret Invasion episodes, and one just dropped today as we're
Yeah.
recording this, and that was just a great episode to record. It's lovely getting people's opinions on that show because I've been quite excited about it, and I'll hold my thoughts on it because I've only seen the first episode. I need to see more. I need to see where it's going
Yeah.
because
Absolutely.
there's a lot going on, and I think there's more going on already than we've been let on. It's one of those shows that I think we're going to look back on the first episode and be like,
Hmm.
"Oh, how did I miss that?" So
Yeah,
yeah,
I think so too.
yeah. So yeah, we've got you coming on for episode 3 of that. So I definitely encourage people to check it out. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again for coming on. I very much appreciate it. And this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, anytime at all, brother. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks again to Hugh for joining me. On this Friday's episode, Larry from the Your Move Creep podcast joins me to talk about Thor. And on Monday, my son Harrison returns to the show to talk about Glorious and Revealer. Thanks for listening. If you like what you've heard, please consider giving the show 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Also, Please share the podcast on social media to help spread the word. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or at creepyandgeeky.com. Music for the podcast composed by Jerry Smith. You can follow the podcast on social media at Creepy and Geeky on both Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to follow me, I'm GeekThulu on Twitter and geek.thulu on Instagram. You can support the podcast by ordering teas and more on TeePublic or by donating to the Ko-fi page. All of the links are in the show notes. Finally, don't forget, stay creepy.